Survival horror is very hard to do. Gameplay, atmosphere, and challenge are all crucial things that need to be balanced in order to create the best experience possible. And when it comes to delivering great survival horror titles, look no further than the Resident Evil franchise, which has been going for almost 30 years now. Even if you don't like these games, you have to respect the longevity. Sure, it's a lot easier when your biggest competitor turns into an absolute dumpster fire, but the point still stands. Resident Evil has released a ton of fantastic titles over the years. Resident Evil 7 was a fantastic game that broke from the traditional formula. The first-person camera and sheer brutality of the Baker family makes this one of the scariest games the franchise has to offer. Resident Evil 4 is one of the most influential video games of all time, with some of the best gameplay I've ever experienced in a survival horror game. And the Resident Evil 4 remake is about as good as a remake can get. The topic of best Resident Evil game is a topic for a different day, however, because as good as those games are, none of them captured the experience of survival horror better than the Resident Evil 2 remake. This game is one of the best games I've ever played. Not only is it a fantastic Resident Evil game, it absolutely nails its survival horror elements, making it one of the best games the genre has to offer. Today I decided to give this game its due respect and do a full dissection on its gameplay and survival horror elements. There is a lot to talk about, so let's not waste any more time. The first notable thing about the Resident Evil 2 remake is how good the game looks. Character models for the main characters and the zombies look absolutely incredible. There are plenty of duplicate models used for the zombies, but it's obviously not that big of a problem. Another thing I love in this game is the HUD. When you're walking in this game, nothing is on your screen. However, if you take damage, your health will briefly show on screen before disappearing again. The same thing with your ammo. This may seem like an odd praise, but when you're making a horror game, atmosphere is very important, and the less shit that is on your screen, the easier it is for the game to pull you in. This design choice would carry over to the Resident Evil 3 and 4 remakes, and frankly, I think it's one of the best design choices that Capcom made when remaking the Resident Evil games. The sound design in this game is amazing. The zombies sound great, and overall general sound and immersive audio is up to the standard of a AAA title. Also, this game's lighting is among the best I've ever witnessed. The game looks and sounds fantastic, but how's the gameplay? Well, it's really good, obviously. General movement is responsive, but you're limited to a jog instead of a full sprint like in the prior games. Shooting is also amazing, and I love the design choice of your reticle getting smaller if you stop moving, which captures the same feeling of stopping and shooting from the original. The overall gameplay is helped immensely by the map design in this game. This game is divided into 3 areas: the RPD, the sewers, and the underground lab. Each of these areas are not only massive, they are littered with resources and items that are crucial to your survival. I also love unlocking more of these areas through the course of the game. Let's use the RPD as an example. When you first enter the RPD, all the doors are locked and you're set on a very linear path at first. But the further you progress and the more items you find, the more the map starts to open up to you. It's very good and steady progression. Now, this game does a lot of things very well, but above the amazing gameplay and intriguing map design, the best part about Resident Evil 2 in my opinion is the sheer difficulty when playing on hardcore mode. Survival horror is always best when it's on the hardest difficulty, and this game is no different. Playing Resident Evil 2 is a lot of fun on normal mode, but hardcore is the definitive Resident Evil experience. Hardcore offers what you would expect from a max difficulty setting. Enemies have more health and do more damage, which is standard of course, but the big difference is the autosave being turned off, meaning you can only save with an ink ribbon just like the classic Resident Evil games. Autosave being turned off is a big deal, but what ups the difficulty even more is the enemies you fight. This game does not have a massive amount of enemy variety. You have your typical zombies, zombie dogs, lickers, sewer goobers, plant zombies, with Mr. X and Dr. Birkin serving as mini-bosses throughout the game. It's a solid amount of enemies, but the best part is the fact that even a single zombie in this game is threatening. Let's use RE4 as an example. In the RE4 remake, a single zombie does not stand a fucking chance against Leon. Even with early game weapons and gear, dealing with one zombie in that game is very, very easy. In the RE2 remake, however, a single zombie poses a much bigger threat, and this is for a few reasons. Number 1, Leon in this game is a rookie, so he's not suplexing and roundhouse kicking every zombie that looks at him wrong, and Claire is no cop or secret agent either. Secondly, while the game gives you plenty of weapons, it's not that strong of an arsenal when compared to the other games in the franchise. Thirdly, the Resident Evil characters, especially in the newer games, are borderline anime characters with unmeasurable skill. In the RE2 remake, however, Leon feels weaker and slower than he's ever been. And finally, the health for basic zombies is wildly inconsistent. Sometimes all it takes is 3 shots and they're done for. Other times you shoot a zombie 9 times in the head, leave the room, come back, and get immediately attacked by that exact same zombie. It can honestly be frustrating at times, but I wouldn't change it. It's not often you see a game's basic enemy pose this much of a threat to the player, but RE2 was able to pull it off and the developers deserve massive credit. The zombies in RE2 are threatening, but with experience you can learn some tricks to make hardcore mode a little easier. Lickers are of course blind and can be snuck past. Zombies can be crippled or dodged with good timing. However, there is an enemy that does not have any counters of any kind. I am of course talking about Mr. X, which might be the highlight of this entire game. If fighting zombies and lickers in the tight hallways of the RPD wasn't bad enough, now you have an 8-foot-tall indestructible bioweapon chasing you the entire time. Mr. X changes everything about the way you play, and his existence in the game alone makes you second guess your every move. Do I want to run into this room even though there's only one exit and he could very easily trap me? Do I even waste the resources on a stun that only lasts 30 seconds? Can I even make it to the safe room on the other side of the RPD without him cutting me off? I cannot stress how much I love Mr. X in this game. I think he's one of the best bosses the series has to offer. There is nothing that captures the feeling of dread more than being on a slither of health with no healing items, making a dash for the safe room while hearing heavy footsteps coming from the nearby hallway. It honestly reminds me a lot of Dark Souls. Now, Dark Souls isn't a survival horror game, but both of these games capture a very similar feeling. Zombies and monsters are scary, sure. You want to know what's even scarier? Losing 10, 20, sometimes 30 minutes of your time because you died before you could reach the next save point. Alien Isolation does the exact same thing. Getting scared by the things in the game you're playing is one thing, but the fear of losing progress really amplifies the scare factor in a survival horror game. And it's one of the primary things that separates RE2 from every other game in the genre. Most Resident Evil games are short, and RE2 is no different. However, unlike this game's garbage sequel, RE2 offers a lot of replayability. On top of the main campaign, you have a second run campaign with some minor change-ups and new weapons, and while the Mercenaries is unfortunately absent from this game, you do have the Ghost Survivor game mode for those looking for a challenge. As I mentioned earlier, the playable areas are huge and are designed in a way to make backtracking easy and accessible. I will admit that Leon and Claire's respective campaigns basically overlapping each other makes the story confusing at certain points. When you get to the sewers, for example, both Claire and Leon have to rescue either Sherry or Ada from the exact same room. It's a confusing story structure to say the least, but it doesn't ruin the experience. It's not like you're playing a Resident Evil game for the story anyway. Another nitpick I have is Mr. X taking his sweet-ass time outside the safe room, which becomes very annoying, especially when playing on hardcore. I honestly would not be opposed to the idea of Mr. X being allowed to enter safe rooms, since they didn't give it to Nemesis in the RE3 remake. Just imagine an enemy like that in a modern-day Resident Evil game. And with that, I think I'm done. The Resident Evil franchise has been around for a long time, and unlike its competitors, Resident Evil was able to sustain its excellence over the decades. Sure, it's had its rough patches, but the recent Resident Evil games have been great. Like I said earlier, there are a lot of candidates for best Resident Evil game. I think the RE4 remake might have the best core gameplay, and is also bar none the best remake I have ever played. RE7 was a much needed shakeup, and despite being fundamentally different from the other Resident Evil games, it's still able to capture the same magic of the older games. The Resident Evil 2 remake is, in my opinion, the best Resident Evil game from a survival horror perspective. I think it nails its survival horror elements to near perfection. It manages to be scary, stressful, and fun at the same time. I will admit, I never played the original Resident Evil games, so the RE2 remake was my first ever experience with Resident Evil 2, so understand that nostalgia is playing no factor in my love for this game. As I mentioned at the top of this video, survival horror is very hard to do, and when it's done well, it's a truly amazing experience. Honestly, if you ask me what the best Resident Evil game is right now, I'm 50-50 split on the 2 and 4 remake. Might have to do a video about that in the future, who knows. But until then, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one.